The recent incidents, the recent incident in Washington, D.C. raises many questions about the conduct of the police when a woman crashed her car into the White House gate and then attempted to flee the scene. The police opened fire on her vehicle as she attempted to back up. She appeared to be running for her life as police continued to fire on the fleeing vehicle. Is this an issue of police misconduct? When can the police use deadly or lethal physical force? I was surprised to hear in a recent television interview with the chief of the Washington, D.C. Police Department, who described and characterized the police response to this incident as heroism. Was there any investigation into the events that resulted in the fatal shooting of the woman later identified as Miriam Carey? As a former New York City police officer, I was trained in the use of deadly physical force, and it is an enormous responsibility. The power which is placed into the hands of an officer of the law to decide to use their weapon. Candidates for selection as police are given rigorous training in the use of firearms, but more importantly, go through rigorous psychological testing to determine their fitness to carry out their duties as sworn police officers. Deadly physical force is defined according to statutory standards of the Constitution of the United States of the Fourth Amendment. That allows an officer to use deadly force when the officer reasonably believes it is necessary to defend himself or a third person from the use of imminent use of deadly physical force, or number two, arrest or prevent the escape of someone the officer reasonably believes committed or attempted to commit a felony involving the infliction or the threat of serious injury, and if feasible, the officer has given warning to his or her intent to use deadly physical force. The Supreme Court of the United States have said that the test reasonableness must be viewed from the perspective of a reasonable officer at the scene rather than 20/20 vision or hindsight, according to the holding in Graham versus O'Connor, a 1989 case. In a book entitled Introduction to Policing, page 148, the issue of police misconduct is described as a complicated topic, and misconduct may be broadly divided into two categories: corruption and physical emotional abuse. It may be organizational or it may be individual, end of quote. The officers who responded to this particular occurrence did in fact use deadly physical force. But was their response reasonable or even ethical under the circumstances, or was it an abuse of their powers? In addition, for several years, I myself have been, as a former police officer, I've been a member of the Providence Police Advisory Committee. We are made up of civilians from different walks of life, and we are given the opportunity to at least review police practices and policies, to hear or to try to improve relationships between the police and our city. I believe that this is one of the best practices in order to maintain good relationships with the police. Police officers are sworn to uphold the law and should never, under any circumstances, willfully violate the rights of anyone in their custody. What if Miriam Carey were your sister or your daughter? Wouldn't you want to make sure that the police acted appropriately? Did they act or react based upon the standards and the judgment that should guide police conduct during their critical decision making? Did they act reasonably? At the very least, there should have been an investigation into the conduct of the officers who began shooting, not only the using the deadly physical force, but shooting first and asking questions later. That's not the standard that we should have for our public servants. In an article written in the Washington Post, reported by the Associated Press, dated Monday, October 7th, the two sisters of the woman who was fatally shot by the police in Washington, they disputed the accounts of the officials. One sister, Amy Carey Jones, suggests police were negligent. She said, and I quote, "I feel that things could have been handled differently," end of quote. Valerie Carey, the other sister, said the descriptions of her sister are, quote, "not the Miriam we knew," end of quote. In an interview with their attorney, Eric Sanders, the lawyer representing the two sisters, he rejected the suggestion that Miriam Carey is partly responsible for her own death. The issue, he said, and I quote, is how the police handled the matter. And finally, and at long last, police of the Washington, D.C. Police Department said they're reviewing the encounter and the use of deadly physical force. Hopefully, there is some closure for those who are the family members of the deceased, and certainly, hopefully, there will be some review of this particular shooting that would ensure that the police acted reasonably.